At Manhattan's most exclusive charity gala, billionaire Preston Montgomery's fiancée Cassandra publicly humiliated a black woman in front of 200 elite guests, calling her the help and demanding she be removed. What nobody knew was that this woman held the power to change everything, and she was about to use it. The crystal chandeliers of Manhattan's Plaza Hotel cast dancing shadows across the faces of New York's elite as they sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries at the annual Hearts for Hope charity gala. Designer gowns rustled against marble floors, and the soft murmur of conversation mixed with the gentle melody of a string quartet. Among the sea of familiar faces, one woman stood quietly near the entrance, her presence unremarkable to most, yet she would soon become the center of a drama that would change everything. Dr. Simone Washington adjusted the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years. The vintage dress she wore, carefully pressed and altered to fit her petite frame, was elegant but clearly not from this season's designer collections. She clutched the cream-colored invitation that had arrived mysteriously at her Brooklyn apartment 2 weeks ago, with no return address and no explanation of how the sender had obtained her information. After 18 months providing free medical care in rural communities across 3 states, she had returned to New York just days ago, exhausted but fulfilled by the lives she had touched. Across the ballroom, Preston Montgomery, the tech billionaire whose charitable foundation was hosting the evening, raised his glass to toast another successful year of fundraising. At 45, he had dedicated his life to using his wealth for good, building hospitals and funding medical research around the world. Beside him, his fiancée Cassandra Whitmore smiled brilliantly for the photographers, her diamond engagement ring catching the light as she posed. Born into old money and raised in the insular world of Manhattan's Upper East Side, Cassandra had perfected the art of looking philanthropic while caring only about appearances and social status. Simone made her way slowly through the crowd, searching for familiar faces but finding none. She had attended medical conferences in hotels like this, but never as a guest at a social event of this magnitude. The invitation had been so unexpected, so out of place in her modest life, that she had almost thrown it away. But something had compelled her to come. Perhaps the memory of her grandmother's voice telling her to never turn down an opportunity to learn something new about the world. It was then that Cassandra noticed her, sharp eyes trained to spot anyone who didn't belong in her carefully curated social circle. She immediately cataloged everything wrong with the woman standing near the dessert table. The dress, while beautiful, was clearly vintage. The shoes, though polished, showed signs of wear. Most telling of all, the woman carried herself with the quiet composure of someone who worked for a living, not someone who lived off trust funds and investment portfolios. "Excuse me," Cassandra called out loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, her voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Could you please bring me another glass of champagne, and make sure it's the Dom Perignon, not whatever they're serving at the general bar?" Simone looked up from the small plate she had been filling with canapes, confused by the request directed at her. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not—" "Oh, don't be ridiculous," Cassandra interrupted, her laugh sharp and dismissive. "Of course you are. Now hurry along, I don't have all night." She turned to the small group that had gathered around them, rolling her eyes dramatically. "The help these days, honestly. They act like they're guests." The words hit Simone like a physical blow, but she maintained her composure with the grace her grandmother had taught her. Ruth Washington had cleaned houses for wealthy families her entire life, enduring countless small humiliations with dignity and tact, always reminding her granddaughter that a person's worth wasn't determined by others' opinions. Simone reached into her small purse and withdrew the invitation, holding it out for Cassandra to see. "I believe this will clear up the confusion," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the heat she felt rising in her cheeks. Cassandra snatched the invitation, studying it with the suspicious eyes of someone looking for counterfeit bills. The paper was genuine, the embossing authentic, but that only made her more certain that some mistake had been made. People like this woman, she gestured dismissively at Simone's entire person, simply didn't receive invitations to events like this. This has to be fake, Cassandra announced to the growing circle of onlookers, her voice carrying across the immediate area. Security should really do a better job screening these things. Some people will do anything to get into an event like this. She held the invitation higher, as if displaying evidence of a crime. Look at this. Someone is actually trying to scam their way into our charity gala. The crowd began to murmur, some guests craning their necks to get a better view of the unfolding drama. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, a distinguished woman in her 80s who had been a fixture of New York society for decades, watched from across the room with a frown creasing her weathered features. Judge Patricia Coleman, one of the few other black guests in attendance, felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the familiar dynamics of exclusion and assumption playing out before her eyes. Simone felt the weight of dozens of stares, some curious, some judgmental, others simply uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. She had faced racism before, both subtle and overt, but never so publicly, never in front of so many people at once. The temptation to defend herself more forcefully was strong, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Dignity, baby girl. They can take everything from you, but they can't take your dignity unless you let them. I assure you the invitation is real, Simone said, her voice remaining calm even as her heart pounded. If there's been some mistake, I'm happy to speak with the event organizers to clear it up. But Cassandra was already signaling to security, her face flushed with righteous indignation. No, I don't think so. This is exactly the kind of thing that ruins events like this. People like her, she gestured disdainfully at Simone, don't belong in places like this. It's nothing personal, of course, but we have standards to maintain. The security guards approached reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unsure how to handle the demands of someone as prominent as Cassandra Whitmore. Preston was across the room, deep in conversation with potential donors, completely unaware that his fiancée was creating a scene that would soon dominate New York's social media feeds for entirely the wrong reasons. Simone gathered her small purse and straightened her shoulders, preparing to leave with what dignity she could maintain. She had faced worse than this during her time in medical school, where she had often been the only black student in her classes, constantly questioned about whether she truly belonged. The disappointment was sharp, not just at the humiliation, but at the lost opportunity to contribute to a cause she genuinely cared about. Just as she turned to go, a commotion erupted near the auction tables. A young boy, no more than 8 years old, had suddenly collapsed to the floor, his small body convulsing as his face began to turn blue. His mother, one of the event coordinators, screamed as she dropped to her knees beside him, frantically shaking his shoulders. He can't breathe, she cried out, her voice breaking with panic. Someone help him, please. The crowd instinctively stepped back, forming a circle around the medical emergency but unsure how to help. Someone shouted for an ambulance while others pulled out their phones to call 911. In the chaos of voices and movement, precious seconds ticked by as the boy's condition worsened. Without hesitation, Simone pushed through the crowd, her earlier humiliation forgotten in the face of a child in crisis. She knelt beside the boy, her trained eyes immediately assessing his symptoms, the facial swelling, the labored breathing, the hives spreading across his exposed skin. Anaphylactic shock, likely triggered by something he had eaten at the event. I'm a doctor, she announced clearly, her voice cutting through the panic with calm authority. Everyone please step back and give us room. Her hands moved swiftly but gently, tilting the boy's head to open his airway while checking his pulse. Does anyone have an EpiPen? Check his pockets, his mother's purse, anywhere he might keep one. The mother, tears streaming down her face, fumbled through her purse with shaking hands. I don't see it. Oh God, I think I left it in the car. The valet has our keys. Simone's mind raced through alternatives. The ambulance would take at least 10 minutes to arrive, and the boy didn't have that long. She looked around the room, cataloging available resources with the quick thinking that had saved countless lives during her years of emergency medicine. I need someone to get ice from the bar, as much as you can carry, she called out to the crowd. And bring me the tablecloth from that corner table. She turned to a waiter who was standing frozen nearby. Do you have any antihistamine in your first aid kit? Benadryl, anything like that? As people hurried to follow her instructions, Simone continued working on the boy, using techniques she had learned during her residency to keep his airway open while his body fought the allergic reaction. She spoke to him constantly, her voice soothing and confident, telling him he was going to be okay, that help was coming, that she wasn't going to let anything happen to him. The crowd watched in fascination as this woman, the same woman who had just been publicly humiliated and accused of not belonging, demonstrated expertise and compassion that few of them possessed. Her movements were precise, her knowledge evident in every decision she made. This wasn't luck or basic first aid. This was the work of someone who had spent years training to save lives. When the paramedics finally arrived, their equipment clanking as they rushed through the ballroom, the lead paramedic stopped short when he saw who was treating the patient. "Dr. Washington?" he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I didn't know you were back in the city." "Hello, Marcus," Simone replied without looking up from her patient, whose breathing had stabilized though he remained unconscious. "We've got an 8-year-old male, anaphylactic shock, likely food-triggered. I've managed to keep his airway open, but he needs epinephrine immediately." The paramedic quickly prepared the injection while his partner readied the stretcher. "His vitals are actually pretty good considering," he observed, impressed. "You probably saved his life, Doc. Another few minutes and—" He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. As they loaded the boy onto the stretcher, his eyes fluttered open, and he managed a weak smile when he saw Simone's face. "Are you an angel?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Simone smiled back, tears she hadn't realized she was shedding sliding down her cheeks. "No, sweetheart, just a doctor. You're going to be just fine." The mother gripped Simone's hands as the paramedics prepared to transport her son to the hospital. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you so much. If you hadn't been here—" Preston Montgomery, who had rushed over as soon as he heard the commotion, watched this interaction with growing amazement. He had arrived just in time to see the final moments of Simone's emergency treatment, and the professional respect the paramedic showed her made it clear that this was no ordinary Good Samaritan. This was someone with serious medical credentials, someone whose presence at his charity gala suddenly made perfect sense. As the paramedics wheeled the boy away, his condition stable and his prognosis excellent, the ballroom fell into an unusual silence. The same people who had watched Cassandra's cruel performance just minutes earlier now looked at Simone with expressions ranging from shame to amazement to dawning recognition. It was then that Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell made her way through the crowd, her cane tapping softly against the marble floor. At 83, she commanded respect simply by entering a room, but tonight there was something different in her demeanor, something purposeful that made people instinctively step aside. "Dr. Simone Washington," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. It wasn't a question, it was a recognition, spoken with the weight of years behind it. Simone looked up, surprised to hear her full name from this distinguished stranger. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor's eyes, still sharp despite her advanced age, studied Simone's face with an intensity that made the younger woman uncomfortable. "You have your grandmother's hands," she said finally, her voice soft with memory. "And her heart." The confusion on Simone's face was evident to everyone watching. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Did you know my grandmother?" A smile spread across Eleanor's weathered features, transforming her entire appearance. "Know her? Child, Ruth Washington was my dearest friend for over 40 years. She worked for my family, yes, but she was so much more than that. She was the woman who raised me when my own parents were too busy with their social obligations. She was the one who taught me that true worth has nothing to do with the circumstances of your birth." The revelation sent a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. Ruth Washington had been a maid in the Hartwell household, but to hear Eleanor speak of her, she had been family in every way that mattered. "Before your grandmother passed," Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger, She told me about her brilliant granddaughter who was going to be a doctor. She was so proud of you, so certain that you would change the world. She made me promise to keep watch over you, to help if I could. Simone felt her knees go weak as understanding began to dawn. The medical school payments that came from an anonymous benefactor, the grant that covered my residency expenses when I couldn't afford them, the funding for my mission work in rural communities. All from your grandmother's trust fund, Eleanor said with a smile. Oh, she didn't have money of her own, of course, but I had been setting aside funds in her name for years, waiting for the right moment to use them. She insisted that you never know where the help came from. She wanted you to believe you had earned everything on your own merit. The crowd was hanging on every word now, the dramatic revelation playing out like a movie before their eyes. Cassandra, who had been standing frozen in mortification since the medical emergency began, felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. But there's more, Eleanor continued, her voice taking on a tone of profound significance. For the past 5 years, I've been searching for someone to take over my foundation when I'm gone. Someone with the intelligence, the compassion, and the character to carry on the work that has been my life's purpose. I've been watching potential candidates, testing them, trying to find the right person. She gestured to the invitation that was still clutched in Cassandra's hand. Those invitations went to 12 individuals over the past year. Doctors, lawyers, business leaders, philanthropists, all accomplished, all impressive on paper. But I needed to see how they would handle themselves in difficult situations, how they would treat others when they thought no one important was watching. The implications of her words sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. This had all been a test, and they had all been witnesses to how it played out. You, Eleanor said, pointing at Cassandra, failed spectacularly. Your cruelty, your assumptions, your complete lack of basic human decency, all displayed for everyone to see. She turned back to Simone, her expression softening. But you, my dear, you passed in ways I never could have imagined. Not only did you maintain your dignity in the face of humiliation, but when a child's life was at stake, you acted without hesitation, without thought for yourself or your reputation. Judge Patricia Coleman stepped forward from the crowd, her own revelation adding to the growing drama. Dr. Washington, I've been following your work for the past 3 years. The free clinics you established in rural Georgia, the disaster relief work you did after Hurricane Maria, the medical mission to Honduras that you funded with your own savings. Your reputation in the medical community is extraordinary. Other voices began to join in, people who had remained silent during Simone's humiliation now eager to share their knowledge of her work. A venture capitalist mentioned the groundbreaking research she had published on pediatric emergency medicine. A hospital administrator spoke of the recommendation letters that had been written on her behalf by colleagues who considered her one of the most promising doctors of her generation. Preston Montgomery, who had been listening to these revelations with growing amazement and shame, finally found his voice. Cassandra, he said, turning to his fiancée with an expression of disgust and disappointment. How could you? How could you treat another human being that way, especially someone who has dedicated her life to helping others? Cassandra's face was pale with humiliation and growing panic as she realized the full extent of what she had done. She had publicly humiliated someone who was not only accomplished and respected, but who was about to inherit one of the largest charitable foundations in the country. Her cruel assumptions had been wrong in every possible way, and now she was paying the price in front of everyone who mattered in her social circle. I didn't know, she stammered, but her words fell flat in the face of the evidence of her character that everyone had witnessed. That's exactly the problem, Preston said, his voice cold with finality. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You saw only what you wanted to see, and you acted on assumptions and prejudices that I find absolutely reprehensible. He removed the engagement ring from his pocket. He had been planning to give her a larger one tonight as a surprise, and handed it back to her. This engagement is over. I can't marry someone who would treat another person with such cruelty. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Cassandra's world collapsed around her. The man she had planned to marry, the social status she had taken for granted, the respect of her peers, All of it was disappearing before her eyes because of her own actions. She looked around desperately for support, for someone to defend her or minimize what had happened, but found only uncomfortable stares and obvious disapproval. Without another word, she turned and fled from the ballroom, her high heels clicking frantically against the marble as she rushed toward the exit. The sound echoed in the silence she left behind, a sharp punctuation mark to the end of her reign as a social queen. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Simone's arm, drawing her attention back to the moment that would change her life forever. "Dr. Washington, I would like to offer you the position of Executive Director of the Hartwell Foundation. Our endowment is currently valued at $500 million, and it grows every year. With your medical background and your demonstrated commitment to helping others, I believe you could transform healthcare for underserved communities around the world." The offer hung in the air like a golden opportunity that seemed too good to be true. Simone felt lightheaded as she tried to process everything that had happened in the space of an hour. She had come to this event as an unknown woman with a mysterious invitation, been publicly humiliated and nearly thrown out, saved a child's life, and now was being offered control of one of the world's most significant charitable foundations. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what to say. It's overwhelming." "Say yes," Eleanor replied with a laugh that seemed to release all the tension in the room. "Say yes, and let's change the world together, the way your grandmother always believed you would." The crowd erupted in applause, a sound that started slowly but built to a thunderous ovation as people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. These were people who attended charity events regularly, who were accustomed to writing large checks and making meaningful donations, but they had rarely seen such a dramatic example of how prejudice and kindness, cruelty and compassion could shape lives in a single evening. 6 months later, the Hearts for Hope Gala that had once been the scene of Simone's humiliation was renamed the Ruth Washington Memorial Gala, honoring the woman whose wisdom and strength had shaped not just one granddaughter, but an entire approach to charitable giving. Dr. Simone Washington, now one of the most powerful women in philanthropy, stood at the same podium where Preston Montgomery had once made his speeches, announcing the foundation's latest initiative, a network of free medical clinics in underserved communities across America. She still wore her grandmother's pearls to every important event, a reminder of where she had come from and the values that would always guide her decisions. Preston Montgomery had become a genuine friend and ally, their shared commitment to making a difference, creating a bond built on mutual respect rather than romantic attraction. He had learned important lessons about looking beyond surface appearances and listening to actions rather than words. As for Cassandra Whitmore, she had become a cautionary tale in New York's social circles, a reminder that cruelty and prejudice could destroy a life as quickly as kindness and compassion could build one up. Her name was rarely mentioned anymore, except as an example of how not to treat others when you think no one important is watching. Standing before the new crowd of donors and philanthropists, Simone thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young girl in Brooklyn housing projects to a respected doctor to one of the most influential charitable leaders in the country, her path had been shaped by the wisdom of a grandmother who cleaned other people's houses, but taught her granddaughter to see the infinite worth in every human being. The lesson was simple but profound. In a world obsessed with appearances and status, true character reveals itself not in how we treat those who can help us, but in how we respond to those who seem to have nothing to offer. Cassandra had failed that test spectacularly, while Simone had passed it without even knowing she was being evaluated. Character, it turned out, wasn't something that could be faked or purchased. It was revealed in moments of pressure, in choices made when we think no one is watching, in the space between seeing someone in need and deciding whether to help. The woman who had once been dismissed as the help was now helping millions, proving that sometimes the people we overlook or underestimate are exactly the ones who will change the world. And in a ballroom that had once echoed with cruelty and assumption, hope and possibility now filled every corner, carried forward by someone who understood that true worth has nothing to do with the circumstances of your birth and everything to do with what you choose to do with the life you're given.